What you are about to hear will blow your mind and give you six-pack abs without even exercising.
Pull up a bar stool and relax.
Hey, who wants to have some fun?
You've made it to Happy Hour with John Gaskins.
Oh, no. Not again.
Get ready for entertaining local and regional sports talk that will change your life. Or not.
And by the way, when you're telling these little stories, here's a good idea. Have a point. It makes it so much more interesting for the listener.
Here's your host, John Gaskins.
Here's Johnny. Hello! Ah!
I'm back, baby! I'm back!
I finally caught the white whale. He's been denying me for months. No. And finally, after ponying up a little cash, he said yes. It's great to have a man
I will play the role of Moby Dick in this drama.
Okay. Go right ahead.
People have called me at least half of that. But
yeah, I'll be Ahab, and I've been called half of that, too.
Rock with a pronounced limp.
That's for 30-plus years he has ruffled feathers, kicked ass, taken names, and held the powerful's feet to the fire for the Argus leader, sportswriter and sports editor, city columnist, content coach, and
You're bringing back some vivid memories of my time at the Argus. But
and after a graceful exit to go into the world of more investigative reporting for South Dakota News Watch and book writing with the COVID Chronicles.
still available on Amazon. You can find it at your public library, Barnes & Noble. And I think Zambro's Variety still has some copies as well.
Yeah, I forgot to bring out a pen. I need you to sign this for me. But maybe I should.
You don't have a signed
maybe,
copy?
Maybe I should read it first. No, I think I went out and actually bought this, Stu.
Okay.
Yeah,
Appreciate that.
I did. I was supporting you and your COVID era.
I will up the value of it increasingly by signing it.
It was a fictional memoir. It was a page turner. I'm not saying that to be sarcastic nor, what's the word? It starts with a P. Pandering. It really was a good, enjoyable read of a time depicted of that time right here in South Dakota. And we're here because he has a new book coming out after just leaving South Dakota News Watch. His name is Stu Whitney, by the way. I think we're done with the
important information.
I think we're done with the introduction. Yeah, Stu, congratulations on the book deal. I mean, you didn't just start writing a book hoping it'd get published. You got a publisher already.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. I mean, when we were going with when I left the Argus, and this because it's a podcast, we have unlimited time. This might take a while, but when I left the Argus. Because of the way these things tend to work, I had sort of a finite amount of time to write my book before I started with a full-time job again, and decided I had thought about doing a nonfiction book then, but with fiction, with a novel, you can just sort of sit down and start writing. A lot of it's coming just from your head, from your memories, from your consciousness. Whereas nonfiction, you got to go out and do the research and sort of curate all that before you even sit down to write. And so I chose to go the novel route, and I'm glad I did because I've always sort of dreamed of publishing a novel and getting some of my thoughts out there, and I thought it worked out fine. Now I'm in another stage where I'm not working for South Dakota News Watch anymore. I've got some time to focus on writing a book, and a lot of people ask me, when are you going to write another book? This time it is going to be a biography of Bob Burns, who's one of the more legendary and colorful characters in South Dakota history. Golden Gloves boxer, World War II paratrooper, recipient of the Silver Star for his efforts in D-Day, captured German soldiers in Europe during those D-Day operations and beyond. And then, of course, to give you the Reader's Digest version, and we can expand on this a little bit more later, but turned Washington High School into an absolute regional powerhouse when there was the only public high school in Sioux Falls. So 3,500 students. They were flying to games. They would fly to Casper, Wyoming. They would play all the Twin Cities teams. They played Boys Town. tremendous success there, goes to Augustana, leads them to their only North Central Conference championship ever in 1959. And then in one of his only unsuccessful coaching ventures, went to USD and coached them for 1 year. Things did not work out there, left coaching, and I think most people assumed he was done with coaching forever. But a group of O'Gorman boosters reached out to him. He was in the Twin Cities at the time, talked him into coming back to Coach O'Gorman, which was, like Augie when he took over Augie, an absolute doormat. O'Gorman was a laughing stock when it came to football.
Yep.
And a few years later, they are hoisting Bob Burns on their shoulders for winning the first ever state football championship at the Dakota Dome in 1981, defeating Mac Hawk's Yankton Bucks. And so that is the Reader's Digest version of an incredible career. And so to capture all that, I'm talking to all his former players, obviously, talking to family, going back through all the clippings of his time growing up in Sioux City and obviously the World War II stuff. And so I'm in the research stage right now, but I'm very excited for what it's going to turn out to be.
Yeah, you said it's like a big blob going back to find old newspaper stories and whatever else you can get your hands on, plus the hours and hours of interviews and notes taken from that. So it's a process.
Well, the funny thing is I had written a story on him in 1996, which was a extremely in-depth profile. In fact, I've joked before that, somewhat seriously, that it might be the longest story ever run in the Argus Leader in the history of the newspaper.
Do you have column inches number? Do you remember it?
Oh, God.
90, 100?
It was more.
200?
It was more than that.
300?
It was probably 100, 150 maybe column inches.
That's a whopper.
And it had actual mini chapters, so it kind of serves as maybe an outline for my book. And Bob Burns, this is, like I said, 96. He died in 2000. He said, you know what, you should write a book about me. I said, Bob, I basically did. Did you see that story that I wrote? But it always kind of stuck with me, and so I'm glad to be telling that story yet again.
Yeah. When did he die?
2000.
Okay. So you were able to get him on the record to do these things
in the nick of time.
In the nick of time. That's great. Of course, for me, the name comes up, having been in Sioux Falls for a collective dozen years, always around the start of the high school football season with the Bob Burns Dakota Bowl, and so that's always been my impression. I didn't know all these World War II hero type of things, but I knew all the others.
He also brought I forgot to mention, he brought the Minnesota Vikings to Howard Wood Field. They played their first ever game, exhibition game in 1961 at Howard Wood Field, which is a story unto itself because he had to go to a bunch of Sioux Falls, his buddies in Sioux Falls, these money guys, Ozzie Schock and some others to put up the money to bring them here.
Yeah.
And he said he was going to sell all these tickets, and I don't know if he gave away too many tickets or what, but they basically took a financial bath on that game. But they got incredible memories out of it, and the Dallas Morning News columnist, somewhat legendary columnist named Blackie Sherrod, came to cover, they were playing the Cowboys, came to cover the game, ended up writing about Bob Burns because he was, such a character and it was sort of doing the operational stuff for the game. And so that'll be covered in the book as well, but almost a P.T. Barnum type aspect to him as far as a promoter, a marketer, a visionary. And Dakota Bowl was, people thought he was crazy when he brought it up. And, you can't do that for a high school football game. What do you mean a bowl game for high school football? And, he had the flyover, he had the skydivers, he had the helicopter delivering the game ball. The game ball was delivered the first year. I think the flyover might have came a little bit later. But there were also some false starts. He started in 1976. He had something called the Centennial Bowl. And there was so a couple false starts before he hit upon this Dakota Bowl idea. And they played Fargo Shanley, which was a real powerhouse back then, and they were I think they had a 35-game winning streak or something, and O'Gorman knocked them off in the Dakota Bowl in this inaugural Dakota Bowl in 1978, and really sort of set the tone for what came. And now every community in South Dakota has a bowl, it seems like, and they use that, as O'Gorman did and Bob Burns envisioned, as not just a fundraiser for football, but they use it as a fundraiser for all activities. And they got new band uniforms out of it at O'Gorman. He really wanted everything to be top notch, not just a football program. And so that is the type of vision that I think was lacking, certainly at the high school level, but I think in a lot of levels of sports and otherwise in Sioux Falls. So sometimes carrying out the vision was, part of the battle with Bob Burns, but the vision was always there, and he was able to get people to go along with him. And so it makes for some interesting interviews, and no one has said, like, no, I'd prefer not to talk about Bob Burns. They're always gung-ho because, I got so many Bob Burns stories. And there's all, you get sort of those stories out of the way, and then you just talk about more mundane things, the interactions they had with the man, and they don't realize that stuff I'm going to put in the book too, because it really kind of sheds light of what kind of guy he was on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah,
too.
was he a character, or was he or what was he like?
He was, he kind of had this high-pitched voice, and, John Simcoe, who was one of his best players at Washington and Augustana, said that he first learned of him in middle school because he heard this high-pitched voice just screaming at players when he was at Drake Springs Pool, and the old Howard Wood Field was across the viaduct right where I think it's Sears Payment Systems or something.
Yeah.
And so he's like, who is this guy? And, later on when him and Jim Luce were, I think, juniors for Washington, they're going to play Dubuque in the first game of the year. They looked over on the roof and they saw some guy on the roof with binoculars. Some guy was scouting for Dubuque, trying to steal some of their plays. So Burns goes over there. So hold on a minute. Goes over, comes back with the binoculars and the notes, and his knuckles are bloody. He beat the shit out of the guy. So you see some of his Golden Globes experience. And so those are some of the stories you hear early on with Bob Burns. And, he's very, very demanding of his players, but they loved him and would literally go to war for him. And he used some of those motivational abilities in World War II too. He was an officer and led men into battle. So there was sort of a precursor to his football experience of figuratively leading people into battle later on.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have a fascinating basis for a book. Did you have other considerations, like did this pop right in front of your face? Did you have other stories from 33 years plus just being a Sioux Falls and South Dakota sports historian that were competition for this concept?
I thought about doing something on the history of the what they call the Big B, but it would also be kind of a history of high school basketball and what that means to South Dakota. I did another major story on the Armour Packers. I think we called it one of the greatest games in high school basketball history in South Dakota when Armour played Beersford out in Rapid City. I think it was 1979. And that Armour team was fascinating. Burnell Glanzer was the coach, and the Friedel boys, the Tiefenthalers. And so I was going to use sort of that game as sort of a microcosm of how much high school basketball meant to South Dakota and kind of the history of the Big B. I still think that would be a good book, and I should probably do it while some people are still alive to talk about some of those tournaments. So maybe that's the next one, but I thought the Burns one was kind of right in front of me there.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it, but it also made me think. I mean, so you're clearly going to be invested in that, and that'll take however long it takes. But you have now an empty nest. I know you're two college-aged kids. One's in law school, your daughter Emily, and Elliot, your son, is about to be a sophomore.
He'll be a junior at Bethany Lutheran. Yeah,
Bethany Lutheran up in Mankato. But you have the empty nest, and I'm not sure what your wife's profession is. What I'm getting to is, for you career-wise, you could have a clean break, go pursue other places to live, other places to work.
Go to med school or something. Just start it all over.
You know what I mean, though.
Yeah.
I mean, once the kids are out of the house, why have you decided to stay and just kind of continue to report South Dakota things and write South Dakota books?
Well, I mean, we're kind of dug in. I'm sure later on might become snowbirds or something, but we're pretty dug into to Sioux Falls and South Dakota. If I was going to leave, I probably would have left by now.
Yeah.
This is basically it's not just my profession. This is what I do passionately is write and find good stories. And so it's kind of what I've done my whole life. So to just reverse course and do something else would be a little bit of a drastic turn. I will give you a little bit of an exclusive here. I don't know if you want to hit the breaking news music. But I also have been tinkering, and don't laugh, but I've been tinkering around with a musical set in South Dakota.
Okay.
So don't laugh. Because when I was
it.
working full time at South Dakota News Watch, I obviously couldn't, you can't write a book or, while you're working full time. It just doesn't really work that way.
Right.
At least I can't. But I could play around with some. When I was even a columnist at the Argus, I would do fake conversations, as you well know.
I was going to say,
talk about that.
When you mentioned musical, I thought Northern Sun Theater, which we will talk about.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
And I've written poems and fake song lyrics and stuff. So I started playing around with that, almost like a writing exercise. Yeah. And so I got a few songs together, kind of making fun of South Dakota events and heritage, and then I said, well, let me try to surround this with a story. And so I ended up with kind of a full-fledged musical. And so...
Like you wrote original songs and everything?
Yes. Not the music. I wrote the lyrics. So
yeah.
I've been in consultation with some people, and you might be hearing more about this thing actually becoming a production at some point.
Wow. Are you... Well,
I don't want to go. I don't want to go too far with this, but
yeah.
I've given you... I think I've given you enough, John, for now.
Oh, I don't know. It's never enough. Yeah. I'm maybe it's some of the same people I know in the theater community here in Sioux Falls. We do have some really talented playwrights and actors, and if you can find it, it's out there here in Sioux Falls.
I think it'd be good to have an original production, set here and produced here, and sort of something for the community to get excited around. I mean, nothing wrong with sort of redoing the old classics, the old war horses, as they say, but you can only really see Chicago so many times. Or
Book of Mormon has been here many times.
So even though those are very much appreciated, why not do something that has the heart of South Dakota beating within it? Yeah. And I think that's what I'm trying to do.
I love it. So are you going to try to do the book and the musical at the same time? Or?
Well, the musical's... The lyrics and what they call the book or the story are already written. Oh. We need to come up with a musical collaboration, and so that's kind of the phase we're in right now, trying to find someone to handle the music, and then it would be more about trying to bring it to the stage. So
okay,
but the writing is, I'm sure there'll be some rewrites, but the writing is primarily done.
Okay, how do you feel from pulling back again for a second time from, writing for the Argus and editing for the Argus, more of a day-to-day job. There are sometimes big, long features, like you mentioned, like on Bob Burns, that you would write. But, the day-to-day grind, you said you couldn't write a book while writing a daily job, writing and editing at a daily newspaper. So, and then you jumped back in, not as much of a daily thing. It's more of a bigger project thing at Newswatch, but still investigative journalism. So, yeah, how do you feel about stepping back from journalism, from just covering things?
Well, I don't know that I've stepped back forever. It's possible that I get back into it.
Yeah.
I don't miss the day-to-day grind of constantly worrying about what other people are doing or what's happening, and oh my God, we got to go cover this. We got to go write this. Maybe when I was younger, that was something that motivated me and was tremendously exciting. I got enough of that when I was at the Argus. The being a sports writer involves a lot of weird hour.
Yep.
As being a sportscaster, you know that as well as I. And then becoming sports editor almost exacerbated that because, I'm supervising all the writers, also writing myself, and supervising the paper getting out every day. And so, we would be there. We would stay. When I first got here, we had 3 editions, but let's say 2 editions. One would come out, they'd bring the papers up from the press around, let's say 11:30. We jokingly called that the practice run. We would look through it. If we screwed stuff up, we would fix it, and then we'd get the late scores in and stuff, and then that would be the city run.
Yeah.
That would basically go, get done around 1 a.m. and you get home, you're kind of have all the adrenaline built up. You're not just laying your head down on the pillow as soon as you get home. So I'm getting to bed, I'm getting to sleep maybe 2:30, 3 a.m. Then I'm getting up and doing it again, working Saturdays. And so I actually had a heart attack, don't remember the exact year, and I'm pretty sure the stress from that arrangement, I'm sure I had some fault, some of my habits had some fault as well, but my point is that the day-to-day thing became less appealing for me, and the ability to actually do some reporting over time and have a chance to sort of let those thoughts coalesce and then write them in a way that readers would enjoy. I've always thought I was better at that anyway, and so that's kind of the type of writing and reporting that I like to do right now.
Sure, fair enough. You gave me an opening there with that heart attack. I've never talked to you about the heart attack because I think I was had moved away. I walk me through it if you don't mind.
Well, the funny thing is, I had some. I was having some chest pains.
What year was this?
This is so. I'm trying to think. I think 2008, something like that.
Oh, okay. It was before I got here, but
maybe 2009. I'd have to check the medical records on that, but I remember Elliot was. I'm trying to think what age he would have been then. He might have been a little older. Okay, it might have been like 2010. But anyway, he was playing basketball, and I would be out chasing around playing basketball with him, and I remember just being really short of breath that week and just kind of thinking that was somewhat odd, and then having trouble sleeping. And I should have recognized the symptoms, that I having some heart issues, and then
you're probably young enough to think that
right.
wouldn't be it. Yeah,
and so I think I called into my doctor and told him that this had been going on for a while, and he told me to go to the ER because he was concerned that it had been going on that long. So I was supposed to cover, this was the South Dakota high school football playoffs were going on, and I think it might have been the semifinal round, but I was supposed to cover a game out at Howardwood Field. I think it would have been like the early game. So I was covering. So I showed up at Avera ER, and they give me an EKG, and they discover that I had a heart attack. I had already had a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
And so I was in danger of maybe having more. And I told the guy, well, I need to cover a high school football game out at Howardwood Field. He's like, okay, first of all, you're not covering that game. Let me just make that clear to you. And that's kind of my mentality back then. It was just like, I got to get to the game. And
who were the teams? Do you remember?
It was O'Gorman against somebody. O'Gorman had the early game. I don't recall. But so yeah, they found a blockage and they did angioplasty, and they didn't get all of it, and so I actually had to go back in. I went to the heart hospital, where I probably should have gone. When he said to go to the ER, I should have gone to the heart hospital, not to the normal ER. But anyway, and so they went back in a few months later, and I think did a better job of it. And I really haven't had many symptoms since then. I actually. I did have a period where I smoked, and I haven't even thought about having a cigarette for like 20 years now. So, but I am symptom free, and but you're always wary of it. You've had a heart attack. You certainly can have another one, and so it's kind of in the back of my mind. But
sure, I mean, some people who have had heart attacks would say it's a crossroads moment or something like that when you think you may have skirted death or gotten close, and it rearranges your thoughts on life. Was that a case for you at all? Or if it wasn't, I know you're not going to be disingenuous about something like that. Yeah. If it wasn't, it wasn't.
I think it was more just I'm going to maybe have to change some things, but I never thought I was going to die, and I never thought, even though people do die from heart attacks at that age, it certainly was possible, but I maybe naively thought that that was not my time. Yeah. But it did make me think about work and priorities. My kids were both pretty young at that age, wanting to go to their activities, wanting to be involved. I coached a lot of their activities. Emily played varsity tennis at Lincoln for 6 years. I didn't miss many tennis matches.
And she was pretty good, right? They were pretty good.
Yeah, they won
state.
Yeah. I think they won 4 team titles during that time. She won 2 singles and 2 doubles championships. I didn't miss many matches, and Elliot's was in basketball, and I certainly didn't miss many of his basketball games. So that's a tough thing to do when you're working for a newspaper. Yeah. So I was able to, for a while, I became a columnist and had little better hours, and then I got into doing news and got away from the sports, and I wanted to stretch myself, broaden my horizons as a writer and a reporter, and I think I certainly did that. Being able to do some projects. We were involved in doing a story. I teamed with Patrick Lally and did a story on some of the commutations and pardons under the Janklow administration that was well received. We did a story about the use of state aircraft by Mike Rounds when he was governor, and so some pretty heavy stuff, and showed that I could handle that, and so that's been important in my career, not to just stay in one box for too long and shift around. So maybe that's why, I write a novel, I write a musical for God's sake.
Northern Sun Theater.
You let me know when you want to get that story done.
No, I want to
tell
people.
That story. Okay.
No. I just
keep teasing Northern Sun Theater. Maybe Rob Oliver could be tuning in. Who knows?
Yeah. Sorry. Musical, book. Investigative,
South Dakota News Watch.
Yeah.
Enjoyed my time there, and who knows what the next chapter is? Literally, who knows what the next chapter is? I've got to write a few chapters of the Bob Burns book, but there will be some stuff coming beyond that.
All right, so we'll go all the way back. I mean, what made a kid growing up in Detroit, specifically Grosse Pointe, which just makes me think of Grosse Pointe Blank, the John Cusack movie. What made you get into all this?
Well, I think I became a writer. I know I became a writer before I became a sports writer. I was, we're going way back, but I think even in like second grade, I'd be writing these stories, and my teacher would ask me to come up and read them before the class, and I was like, okay, not everyone is being asked to do this. So I thought, she's buying it. Yeah. Picking up what I'm laying down at least.
Great practice for years later on Stu's Views on KWSN.
Exactly.
Little did you know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So then I, became, a devout follower of sports, and liked. I thought I'd become maybe a broadcaster. I was going to be the next John Gaskins, being a play-by-play guy or something. And but then I said, why not combine the writing with the sports knowledge, and so started writing for the high school paper, The Tower, at Grosse Pointe South, which is kind of a award-winning high school newspaper, if I do say so myself, and even back then I was controversial. I was playing for the hockey team, but I had a bunch of friends that played for the football team, and so this has been my junior year, and they had made. I'm trying to think now if they had made the playoffs the previous year, and I wrote a season preview saying this team will not make the playoffs, and. This is not South Dakota, my friends. You actually had to earn a berth in the playoffs. You had to go like 7-2 to have any shot at the playoffs. And so,
and these were some of your friends.
These are some of my friends, and they were not happy, and I was alienated by some of them, and they won their first game. And you can go back and find an article. I can't remember for the Detroit Free Press or Detroit News because they covered the game, and they said they wrote about the student newspaper being torn to shreds in the locker room after the game. That's how angry they were. I mean, it just shows that, like, the student paper is usually not critical. They don't write any critical analysis.
Yeah.
So, but I've always written critical analysis and throughout my entire career. That's how I started.
I actually, by the way,
they didn't make the playoffs. By the way,
you were right.
They finished 6-3 and did not make the playoffs.
I actually did not write sports for my student newspaper, maybe once or twice. But the kid who was a sports writer, who was a good friend of mine, and he actually went to sports write and sports edit for the college newspaper at the University of Iowa before becoming a college English professor. But his sports articles in high school were, and he was a jock. He was buddies with all the other jocks, and he. He would write an article. He would make up the quotes, and then he would he'd show his friends.
Yep.
And does that look good? Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I would never say that.
That's probably the typical high school journalism experience.
But this hockey thing. All right. So first of all, both the ripping the paper to shreds thing, and also the fact that they missed the playoffs. Did that just give you more juice for doing this? Were both of those like,
Yeah,
hey,
I mean,
I'm
I'm not one to back down. Some people might react to it like, oh my God, I've lost a couple friends, so maybe I should tone it down. That
Did
was
you
not
lose a
my
couple
reaction.
friends?
I would say so, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
They weren't, I mean, probably weren't very close friends or real friends, but some people would say I need to tone it down. That was not my reaction, no. In fact, I probably ratcheted it up a little bit.
No.
Which has been sort of the tone of my existence.
Yeah.
But hockey. I had played when I was younger, and I actually stopped playing. But I played for we had the team called the Grosse Pointe Stars, and one of my teammates was Jimmy Carson, who later went on to play in the NHL. Grosse Pointe is kind of a hockey hotbed, and he scored 50 goals in the NHL with the Los Angeles Kings. My dad still has a score sheet of the stats from when I was 5 years old, and I outscored Jimmy Carson. So he always tells people, you remember Jimmy Carson? Yeah, my son outscored him. So I was somewhat of a young hockey phenom in Grosse Pointe, but it gets to the point where it's sort of like now we see them specializing in sports. We had to play during the summer, and when all your friends are at the pool and you're walking into an ice rink in the middle of summer, this kind of gets depressing after a while. So I quit. And but then Grosse Pointe South, which hadn't previously had a hockey program, started one out my junior year, and they had all new uniforms and everything. And I'm like, I might just get back into this. And I had played actually after outscoring Jimmy Carson, I had switched to defense. I'm a pretty good defenseman, but I said, chicks dig the goal scoring, so I'm going to play forward in high school, and played third line that junior year because it took me a while to kind of get my gumption back, but I was playing first line my senior year, and we lost to, and this is going to be like old man telling boring high school stories at the bar type
Al Bundy,
thing.
the polk dots.
But junior year we lost to Trenton in the quarterfinal, or we won. We beat Birmingham Brother Rice in the quarterfinals in overtime, and Ed Jockman was their coach, for a long-time NHL goalie, played for the New York Rangers, and then we lost to Trenton 5-3 in the semis. So that's my old man at the bar hockey story.
And then that was your junior year?
Yeah, junior year.
And
then senior year we
didn't
kind
play?
of
Was it?
I was actually a better player my senior year, but we had a much worse team, and we didn't even make the playoffs.
Okay, so forgive me. So were you on the team that you said wouldn't reach didn't deserve to be in the playoffs?
No, that was that was football.
That was football.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, got that.
I know you were following that. Okay. Just the host had no idea what I was talking about.
But did that did that kind of invigorate you with like, okay, I want to, I kind of like this sports writing thing, and I can see what it does, and I'm right. I had something.
Yeah,
I
I
proved my own point. And
there was nothing
all that
wrong.
stuff.
There was nothing inaccurate, and I felt somewhat vindicated. But also, regardless of that one anecdote, I felt like I had a skill for it. So when I got to Michigan State, I think it was my freshman year. Might have been the beginning of the second semester. You go in and you sort of try out to be part of the student newspaper called the State News, and I think I had to show them some old clippings and maybe cover an event, and so got on staff there as a freshman, which is fairly rare, and then started covering football and basketball. So Judd Heathcote was the basketball coach, and he's one of the better, most favorite coaches I've ever covered. Number one, very funny guy. Yeah. And
Always
number two, really respected the student reporters. He would always come. I'd go to practice. He'd come over after practice, ask what I needed. One time I told him I wanted to write an article in his words, and I think it was something about the 79 team. And he said, well, if I'm writing, I better come over to that side of the desk. And he came over, sat next to me so we could work through this article together.
Okay.
Just a great guy.
Wow.
Sadly, the time that I was there, which would have been in covering that team, which would have been like 87, 88, two of the worst seasons in Michigan State basketball in the last, certainly in the Heathcote era. They were a perennial NCAA team, and they did not. One year they made the NIT, and I had to go cover that down at Cobo Arena in Detroit, but they did not make the NCAA tournament either year I covered them. Football, George Perles, I had a much different relationship with George Perles, who could be a little bit of a hard ass, and
Michigan State was pretty good.
They were good.
I
mean, I went to the Rose. They went to the Rose Bowl, and I covered the Rose Bowl. in 80. It was the 88 Rose Bowl, 87 season.
Yep.
So Lorenzo White was the running back. Percy Snow was the linebacker. Andre Rison was a wide receiver.
Yeah, they got past Bo Schembechler in Michigan, Earl Bruce in Ohio, or John Cooper, whoever was there. And
they beat USC in the Rose Bowl. Rodney Peete was the quarterback for USC.
Dang.
And
Heisman candidate.
so I can't remember if it was before. I think it was after the season after that. They had a really good defense and a really putrid offense. And so I wrote something called, there was something called Sport Detroit Magazine that recruited me to write some articles for them about Michigan State. And I wrote something called like the offensive offense and about how terrible Michigan State's offense was. And Perles, it was a magazine writing, so I was a little looser, and so
Yep.
I did take some, I will say I did take some pot shots. And he called me into his office at like 8 a.m. and I remember the secretary's face when I walked out. She was ashen-faced because he just reamed me for like 20 minutes. Like I've never been yelled at like that.
Yeah.
Just full volume.
Yeah.
You son of a, what the hell are you thinking? Because I was a student. Again, they're not expecting students to be that caustic or analytical. And then I wrote also when he had an offer to, I think, go to the New York Jets and ended up staying at Michigan State and got a renewed contract. And I kind of pointed out that, it's strategic maneuver in some ways on his part to get a better deal from Michigan State. And he didn't like that either. But so we did not have a good relationship. I'm trying to think where that was going to go. I was going to add, I know I was going to say Nick Saban was the defensive coordinator. So Nick Saban liked me because I was talking about how great the defense was.
Yeah.
And
just that they read your stuff, first of all.
Right.
And acknowledged it to you. I mean, it's easier to acknowledge when you're critical of them, but that's really cool. Again, this is probably filling you with some adrenaline for the profession, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and I wish I had done the thing with Nick Saban in person, but I talked to him on the phone where he broke down his defense, like the elements of the defense and stunting. And I was like, wanting to do a story where I'm not really an X's and O's guy, but I wanted to do a story explaining why the defense was so good.
Yeah.
And I really wish I had done that in person and have a tape recording of it because he ended up being a fairly successful
he was okay.
coach overall. But it was just a phone interview. Just a phoner with Nick Saban explaining the tenets of defense. No big deal.
And it just went off to the moon.
Yeah, exactly.
No one got to hear it. But
I could probably go back and find the clip if I had to.
Okay. And did you not also exposed some violations within the program too?
There was a guy
some investigative journalism.
Bob Kurtakis was a guy that I worked with on the paper, and he actually had the idea to submit a book proposal, and this is when I was graduating, and so I was kind of in the interregnum between graduating and getting a full-time job at the Argus Leader in Sioux Falls, which we can talk about, and so he and I. We had this publisher called Masters Press that was interested. Yeah, they said, yes, we'd like you to write this thing. So we were shocked. And we dug up stuff about how their academic advisor at the time was steering almost all the football players into a certain major. And I'm trying to remember if it was communications or something communications related. And kind of had a wink, wink, nudge, nudge relationship with the professors where these guys would stay eligible. So we kind of had a chapter on that, which the NCAA later looked into and did find credible infractions.
What's along some of the same lines that the Golden Gopher men's basketball team?
Right, very common in a lot of
got
major
the Final
programs.
Four banners taken away from them, yeah.
But I had a good relationship with Tony Mandarich, and he was only talking. He had told the local media, Lansing and Michigan State, that he was only going to talk to national media his senior year. He was kind of
wow. And this was, by the way, like the best defensive player in the country at the time.
Yeah, he ended up going number 2 overall. He was just, but he was also flying on roids, you know. So, but I went and found him. He agreed to talk to me, and I went and found him at this Gold's Gym where he was hanging around with all these like bodybuilder types. And even this guy from former Mr. Universe, I think that's how he learned how to mask the steroids and everything.
Okay.
And so I had a chapter on Mandarich and talked a little bit about the steroid stuff.
So wait, you did you set a time with him to meet him at the gym and talk to
Yes.
him about steroids?
Yeah, and no,
Not about steroids.
No,
Okay.
not about steroids.
But just to talk.
But
to
he
him.
talked openly about Rory. I think the guy's name was Rory Liedelmeyer, who was a former Mr. Universe,
Okay,
it was kind of read between the lines type thing. He never admitted to doing steroids. He did later, but that ended up being a really good chapter. And then we had chapters of each season, and so it was a seasons interspersed with more like drill down reporting type stuff, and it was called Behind the Green Curtain. And my regret is that I left because I got a job at the Argus Leader, and so I'm like, Bob, I got a job, so I need to go to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And so when the book came out, he was sort of saddled with a lot of the promotional type stuff, and so I wish I'd handled that differently, because I think it could have been. I think it was fairly successful, but there were obviously people that were not happy with the book, and he ended up taking the brunt of that. And it's different now than it was then in terms of like social media and email, where I could have been more involved from a remote location.
Sure.
So I wish I had been there when the book came out. So that's one of my regrets. But we're proud of the book, and that one I don't know if you still can get on Amazon, but there might be on like these used bookstore sites, used book sites. You might be able to pick up a copy.
But when the book came out, was Perles still the coach, or had he been?
He was still the coach.
He was still the coach. I mean, why did he get fired eventually? Did it have anything to do with that book?
Yeah, there was some stuff that he had some NCAA stuff that handed down, and he had some major disagreements with the board. It seemed like there was always something going on with the board of trustees. It was just kind of his time, but it was definitely not directly related to the book.
Well, they weren't doing great wins and losses wise either. The more you win, the more you can overlook some of the other stuff. But yeah, how'd you find and decide to take the job here in Sioux Falls?
So,
Argus Leader, 1990, what year?
Let's say 90. Okay. I had worked for the State News for several years, and then kind of figured I had done everything I could at the student newspaper, and someone had suggested to broaden my horizon, so I started working for the Lansing State Journal, which is a Gannett paper in Lansing, which is the state capital of Michigan. And obviously covers Michigan State heavily, and so the sports editor there would make us aware of the job openings in Gannett that they would post every week, and one of them was for a full-time sports writer in Sioux Falls. And I'd never heard of Sioux Falls, I'd heard of South Dakota, obviously, but knew nothing about Sioux Falls. And so I flew out, and Greg Hansen was the sports editor. He was kind of a little bit of a basketball legend. He had played at Hurley High School and at Dakota Wesleyan. I think he's in the College Hall of Fame.
Okay.
And, I think I covered – they had you cover a game just to kind of give you a tryout. So I went with Wade Mary to cover what was then Sioux Falls College basketball game. I can't remember if I just shadowed him or if I actually wrote something, but I remember it took quite a while for the call to come, but like 2 months later.
2 months?
Yeah, so they left me on the rack for 2 months, and then I got the job, came out here, and Mick Gary arrived not too long after.
Yep.
And that was just when the minor league era had sort of started. The Skyforce was here, but they were in their infancy.
Yeah.
And they were just starting to kind of get up. The Canaries were here. And Mick covered the Canaries, and I covered the Skyforce. And
Canaries started in 93, so you were here for 3 years before they started. But
okay, so
just so
you sure about? Okay, whatever.
Yes.
The Skyforce was definitely here when I was here.
No, the Skyforce, they were the first, right? Yeah.
So by the mid to late 90s, Skyforce was drawing 5,000 fans a game, which for the CBA was unthinkable. Flip Saunders, Daryl Dawkins, all these personalities, and then Mo McCone came in and they won the championship in '96. I remember covering. Musselman was the coach of he started out as the coach of the Rapid City Thrillers.
Yes. Eric Musselman. He had to have been in his 20s still.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. Okay.
He was late 20s, and then they relocated to Florida, became the Florida Beach Dogs. But everyone hated Musselman, and I sort of played on that as a writer.
Why did everyone hate Musselman?
Just the way he is on the sideline, kind of the way he is now, just very manic and confrontational, somewhat egotistical. And he and I had a love-hate relationship too, because he he loved to play off the media and everything, but he thought that some of the stuff I wrote was unfair because I realized that heroes and villains, are kind of what, and I think the CBA and all minor leagues need to have more of that. I think that's what you're seeing with the WNBA, why increase in popularity when Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese were going at it when she was still in college. Heroes and villains, I think you knew the personalities, and there was a time in women's basketball there briefly where I think people were almost paying more attention to that than some of the men's games because the men's games were one and done, and we didn't know who some of these guys were. That wasn't necessarily the case last year, but I think 2 years ago there were some elements of that.
Yeah.
The CBA was good with that for a while, and I played off that as a writer. Manute Bol was in the league for a while. But anyway, so Florida came and played in the, I believe what they call the National Conference semifinals to see who would go to the CBA finals against Sioux Falls. And I swear to God, I haven't seen a more raucous atmosphere at the Sioux Falls Arena, including the Summer League tournament, than when the Beach Dogs were playing the Skyforce. And when you go to a Skyforce game now, certainly the organization has evolved in a lot of ways with having an affiliate system and getting players directly up. But in terms of pure fan involvement and fans actually caring about the team, we will probably never see that again. I mean, it was an incredible era for minor league sports.
Do you think it just went away because the novelty of that went away?
I think so. I think there's a shelf life, where for a certain team.
All the teams had them. I mean, the Storm even. I mean, they're the most successful of all the minor league teams here.
Successful in terms of championships.
And it was, as Matt Zimmer has said many times, it was a thing. It was a cultural, social thing to go to Storm games for a period of time in the 2000s, mostly when they were at the arena. But and they stayed really good and relevant, but the crowds kind of filtered away. It just kind of seems like that's what's happened to everybody.
In the 90s, that was it was cool to go to Canaries games. There were young people, young professionals were going to Canaries games, and I remember I remember
not
people
quite
talking.
That cool.
I forgot about your connection to it, so I
it's
apologize.
okay. It should be, but it isn't. That's okay. We all know that. Not
you have
the way
to have
it used
that.
to be.
You have to have that buzz, and the ticket has to have value. It can't be something that you feel like I can get one for free, so I don't need to pay for it. There was a sellout. The Skyforce games were sold out. There literally you could not get a ticket to see, which is unheard of for the Continental Basketball Association. But there were some good players that came through there. I was dating myself because I told my son that Rick Brunson, Jared Brunson's dad, played for the Connecticut Pride in the CBA. So a lot of these guys I know from CBA connection.
Yeah,
and it's and some great coaches, obviously Phil Jackson, George Carl, Flip Saunders, Eric Musselman. All these guys came through the CBA.
Wow.
Because you had to coach. I mean, because you didn't know what your roster was going to be day to day. You'd lose a guy to a 10-day contract, and you had to kind of get a new guy up to speed almost immediately.
Who was you mentioned Flip Saunders. You mentioned, and he was here for like a year, right? I mean,
a couple years, yeah.
And you mentioned Mo McComb, who's coached the '96 title team. Who are your favorite characters, players, or coaches from your Skyforce covering days?
Flip was good. Flip, I remember going to for whatever reason they're going to watch the NBA draft, and him and Trey Schwab, who was his assistant, and I was in their apartment, and I think I was working on a preview or something, and Flip predicted like the first 15 picks in the NBA draft. This is before social media or anything, just did not miss one. And I'm like, this guy's a freaking basketball savant. He just really true gym rat who lived
Rain Man,
living, eating, and drinking basketball, and ended up getting the job with the Timberwolves, not surprisingly. And but that was kind of you knew he wasn't going to last here for very long. He was good. Mo was good. Mo was kind of a little more of a grandfatherly type, kind of a folksy guy. He was not nearly as much X's and O's as Flip, and not as intense. But he had the suit. He had a little bit of sideline flair, and I think it was good at player evaluation, which you had to build your roster somewhat from scratch every year, and so they ended up winning it all in Fort Wayne. They played the Fort Wayne Fury in the championship in '96,
And our heroes welcome back home, right?
Heroes welcome. They had a big parade. I think they had a parade like through the Western Mall.
Wow.
And a
Bunch
lot
of
of people actually showed up.
by.
Yeah, people at the airport.
Yeah. So Eric Thorstensen, Thor, was telling us a couple of these stories a couple weeks ago. And he mentioned that he was not at the Victor Page broom game. Were you?
I definitely was.
Okay.
I would
consider
myself the definitive chronicler of the Victor Page broom brawl.
Was that like the craziest thing you've ever seen?
Yeah, that was. I'm trying to think now. That's got to be.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
so they're playing the Idaho Stampede. Christmas Day. Yeah. It was a great tradition, or Christmas night.
Yeah.
Great tradition for the Skyforce.
Big family crowd.
Night. Yeah. You know, everyone's got Santa hats on, and it's just a very festive atmosphere. Victor Page grew up in the hard scrabble streets of D.C. You know, gang affiliated, really raw guy. One of the better athletes I've ever seen in terms of just explosiveness, but raw as a human being and as a basketball player. And you can kind of see him getting into it with this guy from Idaho. I think his name was like Ashraf Amaya. It was
him.
Much bigger than Victor Page.
I remember Ashraf just because he played at Southern Illinois, and he would always terrorize Creighton when I was a Creighton fan growing up. Anyway.
So they were getting into it, going up and down the court. And then I think Amaya actually gave Page either not a punch, but I mean, it was like a forearm shiver. And I could tell Page at that point was like, okay, we're going to go at it. And then I'll tell you what Page told me the next day. But as far as what I saw that night, he went up and, grabbed one of the court sweeping brooms. And I'll tell you, he tried to grab something else first, but I'll save that story. And so what people saw was basically him chasing Amaya around with this broom, like he was going to try to assault him with it, and did try to assault him with it. But then Randy Woods, who was also somewhat of a raw individual for the Skyforce, came in and started swinging punches. And so it became a full-on Christmas brawl, and you could just see like the horrified faces on the parents, children crying, and I'm trying to log it all. You couldn't pull out your phone, to record it, so I'm trying to write down in my notebook what all is happening, and just a unbelievable spectacle. Because you occasionally see a fight or something, but you don't see a guy chasing around with a broom and having props, and then
weapons.
And so the next day, I show up to practice, and Victor Page is there, and he's mad that none of his. Well, first of all, he tells me that he tried to grab a brick. They had bricks to weigh down the basket apparatus back then. He was trying to grab a brick, but it was like taped down or whatever, strapped down. So then that's when he decided to grab the broom. But he told me, because Amaya was quite a bit bigger than him, he knew he needed something to take this guy down. So he was going to come with a weapon. So it ended up being a broom. But he was very upset. To some of his teammates, other than Randy Woods, did not come to his aid. And so he called them a bunch of punks and went off. And then Mo saw me talking to Victor. And this is before they had like hand-on media relations guys, because in this day and age, you wouldn't just let me sit down and have a casual chat with a guy that just assaulted somebody with a broom the night before to ring in the new year. So Victor's just going off on his teammates and all this stuff, and so I of course write it verbatim, and he gets suspended for. He was going to get suspended anyway, but he got suspended for like 45 games. I mean, it was a pretty healthy suspension. Jeez. And but the players then would not talk to me. The next game, I went into the locker room afterwards to do interviews, and Mo's like, "They're not going to talk to you.
Wow,
they don't trust you." I said, "Well, Victor, I'm quoting Victor Page verbatim what he said about them."
Yeah.
So it was more about, and it kind of goes back to some of these other things too, with Perles or whatever, that they want me to censor what I put in there. They're not questioning the accuracy. That they're not they're not saying that Victor didn't say it, but they question me putting it in there, because a lot of guys that cover, CBA or minor league sports or any sports, sometimes they're kind of a team mouthpiece and want to get along with the guys in the locker room, and so I will actually carry that over, because I covered the Stampede later, and there's a guy by the name of Mark Kaufman who had a very short tenure and was a real hothead. In fact, you can ask Thor about the time that KSFY showed up unannounced at practice, apparently, which he didn't like. And he started throwing sticks around, broke a stick on the glass or something, yelling about KSFY being there wanting to do interviews. Ask Thor about that.
I will.
But anyway, they started like 0-11, the Stampede, and they had quite a bit of success. And so I said, is it time to think about finding a new coach, basically. And this is kind of even putting me in a difficult spot because I'm writing columns and covering the team. Usually you would have somebody else doing the columns and the beat writer just writing, game reports or features or whatever.
Yeah. It's not like you have to walk around there all the time. And take
it's tough to show up in the locker room every day if you're going to be writing columns. But so anyway, Gary Weckworth, who was one of the owners, was there, and I was waiting. There's sort of that cordoned off area outside the locker room, the Stampede locker room, and I'm standing there, and Gary's like, he goes, I'll give you credit for showing up. He's not happy. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't expect him to be happy. I just basically said he should be fired. And then, so Kaufman comes out, and he walks up to me, and literally, this is his face. His face is like right here. And he's like, okay, what do you got? Fire away. And so I'm asking him questions with our noses are almost touching. And that was his way of just like intimidating me. And I'm like, hey, that second period, some weird bounces, just trying to ask normal questions. That goalie really got hot in the early third period. And then finally I'm just like, forget this. But he did, I think he did end up getting fired later that year. Yeah. But so that's, my style of analytic commentary and caustic commentary definitely was not conducive to being a beat writer. Let's put it that way.
Let's put it like it's more of, for lack of a better word, like that's more of a big league, big city thing. They do these kind of things. I think that's probably, you tell me, I'm sure probably folks in Sioux Falls, I don't know this, had not seen that kind of a microscope and brutal honesty held up to sports teams that had been covered around here before you got here. And so it was new to them. Fascinating to read, I'm sure. But like, did you take a lot of heat around town for it? Did you ever regret it? Did you?
Oh, well, I took more heat for things I wrote, not about the teams I covered, but about the state itself, and sometimes poking fun at South Dakota.
Well, I was going to say, who's your big? Go ahead, keep going.
Well,
yes.
I don't know if I want to bring up the national anthem thing, but I did write a column questioning the need to do the national anthem before every sporting event, just kind of questioning, is it just by rote now, or does it actually carry the same meaning when we have to stand up every time, for a song before a sporting event can start? Would it carry more meaning if it was, done in more unique circumstances, maybe for the Super Bowl or, whatever? It probably went a little too far in some of the way I phrased that, because I was a young buck at that time. I definitely would not write it that way today. And so and that again, before email, so the phone just ringing off the hook. I think Mick called me at home. He's like, yeah, you better get in here because I'm tired of answering the phone, because I would say all these old guys, but I would say people of all stripes were upset about that. And, some supported it, but many were horrified that I would criticize the national anthem. And so I would say that was probably one of the more controversial articles written, certainly during my time there, and maybe in the history of the Argus Leader.
Who'd you say was the group, any particular group of people or teams? I guess we can get into the high school realm of things now, because you were such a chronicler of the high school sports. That really, that was like your biggest enemy, or considered you their biggest enemy. Anybody from outside of Sioux Falls? I guess everybody.
Yeah.
Who did you tick off the most?
Well, Huron, I went and covered a American Legion tournament there, and the field wasn't ready.
Oh no!
They were doing all this construction on the field, and so I wrote a column about, if you're going to bid to host a statewide tournament, at least maybe have your S together by the time people show up, because teams are coming from all over the state, and there's like tools laying around, there's a bunch of dirt mounds and stuff, and I think I made fun of I did a play on the American Legion Code where it was like 1, be honest. 2, be patriotic. 3, don't forget your number 2 screwdriver or something. And so all these old Legionnaire guys were like, how dare you, sir? And I think I made fun of their pheasant statue that you see.
No.
So Huron hated me. Pierre hated me once because I called their football team the worst team. I said possibly the worst team in the United States of America. And when I would do these playoff previews or prediction things, because there was a predictions column, I felt I had some latitude to sort of tee off. And so occasionally I'll run into people and like, yeah, I was a junior the year that you said we were the worst team in the United States of America. I'm like, my condolences.
Yeah, what do you say?
Or they'll say you picked against us, and when we had a rally, a pep rally because of your article, and then we ended up winning or something. So they were motivated. Trying to remember some more specific
Back to that
ones.
football team in high school.
Yeah, it was just kind of a never-ending variations of the same theme.
Yeah.
I mean, Yankton hated me just out of general principle, I think. I'm trying to think of some of the other. Well, then even like the Sioux Falls schools, because they were pretty bad for a while in football for a long time, and I said it's going to be Roosevelt's annual death march up to Watertown, and Brent DeBoer's like, death march? You kidding me? I'm like, okay, well then you end up losing 40-0, so it's
I think it's again the phrasing.
Figurative death march.
I think it's in the phrasing, yeah. Back to the phrasing part.
I'm trying to remember some more, but there were quite a few.
One of the first high school basketball games I remember, and I think it was a state tournament. I think it was in Brookings that I remember calling on the radio. I walk in there, and it's pretty close to tip off, I think. Shocker, I'm getting there a little late, and
that's so unlike the Gaskins I know.
Yeah, I'm getting there a little late and hastily setting things up, but the atmosphere is electric right on top of us because a student body, it might have been Watertown. I know it was. I think it was Watertown, but it doesn't matter. It was just they were doing a chant before a tip-off of a state high school tournament basketball game. Stu Whitney, Stu Whitney, Stu. I don't know if you remember hearing that. Yeah,
I'm glad they cleaned it up a little bit.
Yeah, that was just nice. They were just
sometimes the chants were not that that polite, but I mean, showing up to high school games and have student sections chant in unison, usually slightly more negative tone than you just laid out.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was again. Heroes and villains, it got people excited. It got them more into the game, into the rivalry, and so a lot of times it was Sioux Falls versus so and so.
Yeah,
and it was sort of Sioux Falls versus ESD was a common theme, and but even some of the intra-city stuff was interesting.
Do you have any regrets or any regrets?
Not really. I mean, this whole thing about change. I mean, you might change like. Elements of your writing mechanically, or say I'm going to try to write shorter, or I'm going to get to the point quick. But it's hard to change your voice. I've always been told one of the better aspects of my writing since I was younger was that I write with a voice. Why change that voice? So a lot of times I'd be writing something and say, do you really want to pull the trigger on this?
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, this is the way you've always done it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it was in the wrong. In the wrong avenue or in the wrong venue, wrong platform for some of the things that I wrote. Like I said, being a beat writer was not the right platform for some of the more caustic analysis. It was always geared to more commentary and being a columnist, which I think is what I truly was pretty much the whole time.
Yeah.
So if you go to a major city, you'll see and have always seen columnists that tee off. That's sort of their reputation. They tee off. But I didn't want to only be that. So I wrote a lot of features. I wrote and I moved on into the news. So I think I showed that I could a certain versatility in writing that I was kind of proud of.
Yeah, and not just take pot shots. And look, you were kind enough once a week on the daily radio show on KWSN to walk in with Stu's views, and I could tell you or at least I assumed you enjoyed writing those too. That's a different thing. You're writing for kind of radio, but it's still, you kind of tried to bring it. A lot of times with humor, a lot of times with, just bravado, but also the same sort of commentary you would write or print, and maybe you did sometimes print what you wrote. But and this sounds selfish, but I was just a part of many other hosts that went through that show. It was an event for us. What kind of an event was it for you to do that radio hour every week? People still remember it.
Yeah, it was good. It was good for me
today.
Yeah, it was good for me to get away from print journalism, and again, in many other markets, that's what sports writers do. They go on the radio, and but in Sioux Falls, it was sort of a little bit of a new concept, and to have a set weekly platform called Stu's Views, where I could just sort of tee off. And we were talking earlier about Craig Maddock, the sports director, and the host, your co-host, never told me what to say or what not to say, or hey, why don't you stay within these parameters. Not once did he try to adjust or rein in the content of my Stu's Views. So I always respected that of him, and I think they were well listened to, and sometimes they would definitely. The point, I guess, is to get a reaction. Sometimes it was more negative than others. Sometimes it was just positive. I did a Stu's Views about going up and catching a foul ball when Elliot was young at a Tigers Twins game, and putting it in his nestling it in his little hand when he was sleeping when I got home, and I got back to the newsroom and somebody's like, "That's the best Stu's Views you've done," because it was just. I thought it was somewhat sappy and sentimental, but sometimes people want that instead of Pam Holman is terrible or whatever.
Relatable, but you would also have your biting, cutting things, and you would also you'd have different forms of presentation. Quizzes, good news, bad news. Right,
good news, bad news.
Always enjoyed.
Which I later brought onto my Sioux Falls Stew show that we had, but the conversations were. I always liked, and that's led to me, I think, writing the musical. I always liked writing dialogue, so I quite often would have columns that were fake conversations. A lot of times it would be the high school football championships, and it would be a fake O'Gorman fan talking to a Roosevelt fan in the parking lot, and I'd be able to weave in a lot of the tradition between the schools, and those were always pretty well received. Mm-hmm. The one that I do remember that you have alluded to and foreshadowed was Northern Sun Theater, which was when Sioux Falls College was trying to get into the Northern Sun, and Augustana was somewhat resistant to the idea because they considered themselves slightly higher on the pecking order, academically and otherwise, and athletically, than the coup. And so it was based on reality, but it was a conversation between Willie Sanchez, who was now the USF, now what we call USF, former athletic director, and then Rob Oliver, who was the Augustana president at the time, and he was one of the ones that was resistant to the idea. So you read the role of Rob Oliver, and I did the Willie Sanchez character, and I wish I had the text. We could recreate it right now, but you did it. It was written in kind of Oliver's role was in kind of this almost prissy, pretentious, erudite tone, and Sanchez was more sort of meat and potatoes. Yeah. Exemplifying how the institutions were perceived, and
Willie was just making the cut and dry points, which I think in your writing and your voice, the point was it makes all the sense in the world for the USF to be in the Northern Sun, and that they were worthy, and so it was you through Willie, and both writing and the way you delivered it, because it's not like you did a Willie impersonation.
Right,
you just read it as you. And then, you were playing the straight man to my whatever stooge or whatever you want to call me. Where,
yours was a little more theatrical.
The counterpoints were, ridiculous as to why.
So you could see where I stood on the issue.
Yes,
based on what each person was saying.
And I enjoyed every bit playing. And I never knew Rob Oliver. I'm sure he did a great job as Augustana president. But I relished that role, and we got in a little trouble.
Yeah, basically Rob Oliver or someone, I'm sure it was started with Rob Oliver, but contacted Craig Maddock and said that Augustana athletes and coaches would no longer be welcome on the show for the foreseeable future, and then they later relented on that.
I'll just never forget Craig laughing hysterically the whole time and then standing up and giving us a standing ovation like he was at a play and the curtain call. And so, that was definitely one of my favorites. But this whole time we're talking about, it was all in Sioux Falls. I've already asked you why, you're still here now. I remember asking you this first time I had a real conversation with you outside of the KWSN studio or a sporting event, and I just remember asking you, Sioux Falls was your first job. I'm going to guess, you had dreamed of bigger markets or bigger outlets, and like you met your eventual spouse here, and and had your kids here, and that's the reason why you've been here. But was there ever a point where you tried or wanted to try, or did you just be like, this is it?
I was never good at networking. I always had a feeling like it should be almost like college recruiting or the NBA draft. Like if you were really good, they should just come find you. And that's not the way it works, unfortunately. Sometimes it is, but not primarily. And so I was never good at going to these conventions or even, keeping my resume updated, or even, I always was cocky enough to think, it'll just happen. And then other things just happened. I got married. I had kids. She's from Sioux Falls. She's very close to her family. They're all in Sioux Falls. I think the thought of her leaving, I think, was unconscionable to her. And when you look at things now in the newspaper industry, what has happened in newspapers, I'm kind of glad it happened, because you realize the ephemeral nature of some of these careers and jobs, and they can go away quickly. And the other stuff is, it's total cliche, but other stuff is more important and lasting. And I saw that when I had my heart attack, and I was just working ungodly hours at the Argus, and ended up changing my rotation a bit, where I was able to spend more time with my kids and with my family. And those are, you still have, that doesn't mean that you don't prioritize work. My writing is very important to me. It's just found different outlets now. And like this book project, I find myself getting up in the morning more excited and ready to get after it than I have been, because it's a real passionate thing for me to sort of take all these interviews, corral this incredible character and all these different stories that people have at these different stages of his life, and turn it into a coherent volume for people to enjoy. It's probably the biggest challenge, biggest professional challenge of my life.
Yeah.
And so that wouldn't have happened if I was in Sioux Falls. A lot of things wouldn't have happened if I was in Sioux Falls. Things happen for a reason. I believe that. And so I'm just looking forward to the next chapter.
Yeah. And by the way, stepping back to your first book, I mean, you've been a sports writer, news writer for your whole career, and you get a chance to write the book. I mean, first of all, how tough was it leaving the Argus after all that time?
I think it's no secret that the Argus had changed quite a bit, and this was during COVID that I left, which helped accelerate some of the things that were happening.
Yeah.
We were working from home at that time, so it wasn't like this tearful leaving the newsroom that it might normally have been. In some respects, that had already occurred. The fact that Gannett, everyone always says, Gannett ruined the Argus, or Gannett ruins newspapering in Sioux Falls or other communities. Gannett was actually bought out. They merged with Gatehouse, and a hedge fund was involved with the Gatehouse takeover, and thus with the Gannett takeover. And so people other than, believe me, there's enough blame to go around with Gannett and some of the decisions they made. But the speed with which the newspaper tradition in Sioux Falls has been degraded and diminished was greatly enhanced by the fact that it was taken over by this hedge fund, which tries to obviously cut expenditures through cutting of salary, firing people essentially, or offering buyouts. And that's what I took, a voluntary buyout. but also the selling off of resources such as the building. And when I drive by that building that I spent so much of my life in and see it empty and 4 lease signs, it hits you every time.
Yeah.
Just incredible memories in that building. I wrote some of that in the book. It was such a symbol of the community and the avoid. Argus, literally the eyes of the community. That's what it means. So,
yeah, it was something.
So it was
just the sports section alone. Sorry to interject, but I mean, when I look back, it was just normal life when I moved here to Sioux Falls, and the Argus Leader was it looked like a regular newspaper you'd see anywhere else, and it was, but. At full staff of news writers, and you're covering politics and doing investigative journalism. The sports section, everything was covered. High school, everybody had all the colleges had their own beat writer, or Augustana and USF combined. But and everybody knows all this. Mick and Matt and Terry, and now that's all looked back on. And this was as recently as 5, 6, 7 years ago, as like a golden age where I can't imagine being in that newsroom and the buzz and the talent in there. And
when we had that staff,
it all fell apart so fast.
We had like 7 full-timers, maybe 3 really good part-timers, staff of 10. Now they have 1. But it was, you mentioned myself, Mick Gary, Terry Vanderbeck, Matt Zimmer. Ron Hoffman was kind of a behind-the-scenes type guy that no one would know, but did a lot of I called him kind of the guy Scotty down in the engine room. Yeah. And Chris Solari was there for a while.
He's now the Detroit Press, Michigan State writer.
Detroit Free Press, right?
Enough.
And we're covering the Summer League tournament, which was one of the bigger things, probably the biggest sports happening since I've been here was the Division I move, and then getting the Summit League tournament. Probably the biggest thing we covered is the Summer League basketball tournament, and putting out a special section for that, being there every day with those guys. We covered the hell out of that tournament, as well as everything else. Our Elite 45, the college football recruiting when we had our 10 most wanted, the first 5 for basketball. A lot of these traditions that have sort of been torn asunder were elevated during that time. And not a day goes by when I don't venture out in public and have somebody, talk about, number one, reminisce about those days, but number 2, just say how terrible it is now that they don't have that sort of kind of all-encompassing publication to go to where they can get all the news that they wanted. Not to sound too traditional, not only just slap down on their front doorstep, but even online. I think it's been splintered the media has been splintered to the point where people don't know where to go all the time to find what they would consider kind of a definitive news or news report or sports report. You kind of have to jump around to find what you're looking for. Yeah. And that's a problem, I think, generally, nationally, politically, where people have found sort of echo chambers and found places where they get their news, where they can kind of find the kind of news that they want rather than what is actual news. And so it's a media problem in general. It's certainly not just in Sioux Falls, but it's very unfortunate for someone who worked in that building for 30 years to see it empty and dark.
Yeah. Okay. And but it did lead. This is your first venture after that, right?
Yep.
The COVID Chronicles, and it all coincided. You just decided to write about our times here, but again, you call it a
fictional
memoir. So I mean, I think anybody who reads this, who knew a lot about what was going on with the politics in the city and the state at the time, handling the pandemic, it feels like, so a lot of this is personal. So some of the things we've been talking about here, you might find in the book.
Yep.
But I've always wanted to ask you, it just kind of feels like, I'm not going to do it here, but so this person was this, and this person was that, and that. I'm sure you've had some people ask you about that. Well, how did you go?
Some are pretty obvious.
How did you go? Yeah, they're obvious. Yes. How did you go about that? what was it like for you to write something like this?
Some of the things I had to. The reason it's called a fictional memoir is it's not a true memoir. I mean, I took some things that actually happened to me, but I changed a lot of the characters around just to make it a more coherent narrative. Yeah. I didn't want it to be, I was born in 1967, and right. No one wants to read that crap. So I wanted to make some political statement. I wanted to make some statements about what had happened during COVID, but I also wanted to sprinkle in some of my some anecdotal stuff about my life, and so sometimes it's done just to not complicate the storyline. So, like in the book, I have one child because it was just easier to do it that way. I have one brother in the book. When in real life, I have two. Some of the people I work with were sort of everyone. I get asked a lot about who is this, and in the book in terms of some of the newspaper stuff. The answer is really no one is exactly that one character. There's a lot of hybrid stuff going on where I combine some things, and even politically, I combined some things. When you look at some of the political leaders, the governor at the time, I think, was pretty clearly who I was writing about.
Yeah.
But a lot of the other ones are a little more.
It felt like the mayor was a combo of two mayors.
Correct.
Okay. And but some of this was deeply personal stuff. Was that hard to write, or was that cathartic to write?
I was a little bit, my family kept saying, "What are you writing about? When can we read it?" I'm just like, never. But remember I told you about writing with a voice and just trying to trust that voice. Yeah. Every time I'd come to a thing like, "You sure you should write this? You sure you should put this out there?" I was just like, I gotta stay with my instinct, stay with my voice, and just be confident in it. And I told my wife, I'm like, you might not love everything in this book, but I'm writing it for people that don't know us. I'm not writing it. It's not one of these things where I'm just give it to family members. Hey, what do you think? It was for public consumption, and I wanted the public to like it, and I wanted it to be as good as possible. And so I thought it would be better if it was authentic. And so that's why I use a lot of my own stuff that had happened to me, because one thing readers will not tolerate is if something is inauthentic and if it does not ring true or plausible, unless you're writing about dragons or something, but if you're writing about real life, so I want it to be authentic, and so that's why I borrowed a lot of little things that happened to me along the way.
All right, it's I think a lot of people who are watching or listening to this have read it, but where can it be found again? The COVID Chronicles.
So Amazon, obviously. If you're into more physical bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Zambros, library, actually, both libraries that I've been to recently had it, so it's out there.
And do you know when this Bob Burns book is going to come out?
All I'm saying is 2026. There's too many variables there to try to pin it down, but it'll be coming in 2026.
Well, congratulations. This was fun. Thanks for doing it.
Appreciate it, man.
And we could go on, but Matt Zimmer's waiting in the wings, and we don't
Zimbo in the house.
We don't want to make Matt wait.
He tends to grumble anyway, so you don't want him. You don't want extra grumbling.
You don't
from
have
him.
to tell me. But while he's here, we can embarrass him. What is that? I mean, you worked with him for 15 years?
Something like that.
Yeah. I mean, what was that relationship like? And how would you describe working? Having
he
Matt
started
Zimmer
as
work
a
for you?
stringer or part timer. Started as a stringer, and anytime you bring a stringer on, you're like, okay, this is gonna be some snot-nosed kid, and we're gonna have to clean up his work and all this stuff. It's kind of sometimes it's more trouble than it's worth.
But he was a snot-nosed kid, wasn't he?
That part rang true.
Yes.
But his copy was pretty good, and you can kind of see that pretty quickly. So he rose through the ranks pretty quickly. I think he was from stringer to part timer, and then he was waiting for someone to leave or die basically, and then he became a full timer. Obviously knew the market very well. He's a Washington High former athlete. Was a student of the minor league scene. In fact, used to read my Skyforce stuff and Mixed Canaries stuff. So we didn't really need to get him up to speed on anything. He's knows a shitload about sports to begin with. And I used to, for lack of a better, more imaginative nickname, would call him Johnny Deadline, because he could meet a deadline like no one. I mean, we used to do something called Twins Talk. I'm probably going longer than you wanted, but there was a little daily snippet that we'd run, Twins Talk, and a little mini column about the Twins. It would be misscheduled or somebody forget to do it, so I'd text Zim, I need you to bang me out a Twins Talk in about 10 minutes. One time he was at the Canaries game, out in the stands, did one in his notes app and just sent it.
Have you been watching the Twins game? Did you know what was going on?
Well, it's not always about the game.
Oh, okay. Just overall, bigger picture. Okay. It's on his
BlackBerry.
Okay.
I might have found like one period out of shape, but otherwise just slapped it in there and ran it. But it became obviously more germane to his coverage of South Dakota State and things like that, when there are some pretty deadly, and also high school football, those double headers at Howard Wood Field. It was like a coach, when I was sports editor, it was like a coach moving the players around. I'm like, okay, give me Zimmer on that late game at Howard Wood Field.
Yeah.
Because I knew, boom.
Yeah.
So anyway.
I can't ask you about Zim if I don't ask you about what Mick Gary has meant to your life as well. That's how we'll land the plane.
Yeah, Mick and I go further back because I mentioned he showed up soon after I got here. So we were kind of partners in kind of ushering in a new era for the Argus sports department. John Egan had recently left. Bruce Connolly had recently left. Those were kind of old war horses. People were used to that. So we kind of had to, win over some people or show what we could do. So yeah, Mick and I were almost more friends than colleagues. And I became sports editor, and he was covering USD. I would change a word that he didn't like in his game story, and then he'd be pissed at me for a week. So it was kind of a different dynamic, but we remained great friends. And I don't know, it's tough for me to sum up the Mick Gary thing in just a few snippets. But
okay, can you
we're good friends.
Can you sum up the Terry Vanderveck thing in a few snippets?
Extremely talented guy.
Matt's laughing.
You could tell. You could tell he was could go on to something else. He had something where he was like such a workaholic covering South Dakota State that he had something called the Tour Divorce, where he would like plan his own schedule going around to all these. He was covering all these road games, and his wife was pissed off about it, so he called it his Tour Divorce. And he didn't get divorced, but he realized he could not keep up that pace of covering South Dakota State the way he did, and other stuff, And so he eventually got a job with Sanford, and I follow him on Facebook, all his family stuff that he does. But yeah, I would say when we had Whitney, Gary, Zimmer, Vanderveck, Solari had just left, Ron Hoffman in the engine room, Rob Rissison, part-timer, Wade Mary, part-timer. Who am I forgetting? What's that?
Justin Wolf.
Justin Wolf, great part-timer, who I personally brought along and corralled and made him a great writer in case he's watching.
Well, I got to work with him for 3 years at Dakota News Now, and he was an excellent editor. I mean, he had a good voice and writing for broadcast, and very, very sharp and helpful. That was the golden age.
I think so.
Those were the days.
You'd be hard-pressed to find a better sports staff than that. I don't care what city, what state, what country you're in. That was a very solid sports staff.
There we go. I don't think that's controversial enough of a remark. You need to finish on a controversial remark. It wouldn't be Stu without saying something to piss people off. The Lions are going to win the NFC. The Lions are going to win.
That's too easy. Lions will win the next 3 Super Bowls.
Okay.
The Vikings will not make the playoffs this coming season.
No, I said something controversial, not something wrong.
Not something obvious.
Stu, it was a pleasure, and hopefully we got a little, Matt got to watch it. It's almost like we got to catch up with Matt now, but that's it. Stu Whitney, COVID Chronicles, Bob Burns' book. Look for it at Stu Whitney on Twitter.
Appreciate
all that jazz. Sioux Stu. That's it for Happy Hour this week. For video producer Cordell Wright, the great staff here at the Gateway Lounge, I'm John. Cheers.
You need anything else, John?
No, I think I'm good, Greg. I think I'm going to tap out.
All right. Have a good night.